Hello, it's Drake again, and today I will be sharing a reading list I put together called, somewhat extravagantly, a reading list for an ecological civilization. And part of the reason I put this list together was because I am looking for a reading list for an ecological civilization and couldn't find one. I couldn't find one really that satisfied my interests. I found some decent ones that were kind of like, reading lists for environmentalism or reading lists for, sustainability or something like that. But I was highly suspect because they never included novels or poetry. And I don't trust someone who doesn't read novels and poetry. So I ended up making my own list that does include some novels and poetry, as it would have to. But yeah, so that's the basic idea of this video. Now, I will be including a link to a post I made, which is really just a vehicle for the PDF of this list. I think the list is about 100 books. I restricted myself to full books, so there would be other things I would share, like a single poem here, a single poem there, a single essay that, maybe would be valuable, but I just wanted to keep it strictly to books on this list. So, but nonetheless, I still got it up to about 100. What I will be doing in this video is sharing some highlights from that list of things I have already read, and I can confirm that they are worth reading. Some of these being my absolute favorites, the ones highlighted in green on the list. And so, yeah, if you want to check out the list, I'll put a link to the list in my Patreon. It's a free to view thing, but it was just the easiest way for me to transmit a PDF. You can also see, if you go to the Discord, I posted it there, but I know not everyone has Discord. So if you're curious, I'll explain my rationale for the list a little bit, and then I'll just show some books that I read that I can recommend, talk about them a little bit, and then that'll be that. So I'll take maybe a minute or so to explain how I got interested in this, and then we'll go from there into the books. So, the last few years, I've had a few personal thought shifts, you could say, where my way of thinking before is almost totally unrecognizable from my way of thinking afterwards. One of the main ones was really getting into linguistics, and that's been, 4 or 5 years now, let's say, give or take. And then the most recent one is thinking about the earth as a system. And another word to put to that is ecology. Ecology is a systemic understanding of the relationships between usually organisms, but it's kind of broadened out to be a word encompassing all sorts of relationships, networks of relationships, you could say, systems of relationships. And so, of course, where it's most commonly thought of is in ecosystems, where organisms are interacting with each other and keeping each other in balance. You can think of the whole earth as itself an ecosystem, the broadest ecosystem. But then that word system gets you to thinking about things that might not normally be thought of as ecology, like economics. And in the end, economics is a very sliver on top of the entire, global system. Although it's normally thought of as the opposite, like economics is the big thing and then nature is like a little sliver of economics. But of course, that's a foolish and short-sighted way of thinking that is rather rampant, which is one of the reasons why I felt it necessary to have a list together that if someone was interested in going down the same path as I have been going, this is there. So I was thinking about how oil influences economics, which I've never really heard talked about. Now, I'm not formally educated in it, but even people who are seem to be unaware of it. Oil and fossil fuels ground our entire civilization. And then beyond that, a little bit more general, how energy itself contributes to the entire ecosystem. Of course, the sun's energy coming in is the energy we have. Apart from the sun's energy that's already been placed on the earth, turned into plant matter, and then, buried underground that now we're digging up and burning as coal and oil and so on. Of course, there's some, earth radiation also is energy, but that's not very much used compared to what the sun is able to to give us. Still getting over the tail of my illness. So that's a little bit of the background why I've been so interested in it, is broadening my understanding of the entire earth rather than keeping it narrowly focused, let's say, on people or interactions between people. Obviously, climate change is a small aspect of ecology, but it's a large aspect of our possibility of sustainable life on the earth going forward hundreds, thousands of years as a, you could say, as a civilization with advanced technology and so on. And so I think it is extremely valuable, beyond just understanding the way things are with energy use and our natural environment, wilderness, and how people interact with all of those things. Now, also thinking about what this will look like in the future, both on a small scale in an individual life, and then in general and philosophically. So let's go ahead and get into the books then. The first book I wanted to give is the most practical. Now, practical, I mean, you could pick this book up, read it, and then you could change your life. You could save money. You could harm the environment less. And it's written in a very accessible style that I think makes it easy to recommend. There is a digital version, but I prefer physical books. And the book is called Building a Better World in Your Backyard Instead of Being Angry at Bad Guys. So, a long title, throwback to the 18th century, I suppose. And as you can see there, the authors are Paul Wheaton and Sean Klassen-Koop. So as the title implies, rather than thinking about politics and societal scale or climate scale considerations, you can instead simply have an unenlightened self-interest in saving yourself money and making your life easier. But by doing those things, you can use less energy, you can harm the environment less, you can create less waste, you can simplify your life, make it more enjoyable to live. And of course, not everything these two people recommend falls directly into those categories, but a lot of it does. And there are very practical things, going from simple technology, like thinking of how the bicycle is the most efficient method of transportation. You think of, well, what's the most efficient way to heat a house? What's the most efficient way to cook food? This kind of thing. And this book is very good for that. It's also good for just practical things of, if you have a washing machine, how do you use less energy by still using the washing machine? If you, so on and so on. So if I had one book to simply recommend that's practical, that you could pick up and improve your life tomorrow, this book. So that'll be my first recommendation. That'll be my most practical recommendation. Next, I want to get to some books that I think help with the political sphere. These books are more broad than just an individual basis, and because of that, they are slightly less practical in the sense that they won't change your life tomorrow, but I have confidence that if people read them, we would have a better world in the next 5 to 10 years if everyone read these books. So the first one I'm going to start with is also the last one I read because it's just on the top of my mind, I suppose. But it is a book that's pretty well known, and it is also striking how many of these books were like written in the 70s, for example. But this one here, Small is Beautiful, Economics as If People Mattered, by E.F. Schumacher. And E.F. Schumacher was Oxford-trained economist, born in Austria, I believe, and then ended up moving to the UK. And he was on the UK coal board for a while, but basically he was focused on how to turn economic theory from an exploitative, destructive, dismal science into a human scale and healthy science, you could say. Health in all of its senses. And basically all he had to do was think about ecology plus economics. And interestingly enough, etymologically, they do both come from the same place, oikos, home. And I do think if you do think about economics as bettering our home, we would be in a much better spot. But what E.F. Schumacher ranges from in this book is thinking about production. He thinks about Buddhist economics, which is just kind of an example of saying that our economics is very culturally based, and it's obviously not universal. Like even in our own culture, it doesn't make any sense. Secondarily, he thinks about resources, which is basically energy, and that's, coal, which he thought about a lot, but you can transfer all of his insights over to fossil fuels in general. He talks about the third world and development, this, air quotes word development, and how often the so-called first world gets it totally wrong and tries to import their own biases and values into a world that the biases and values are totally irrelevant. And then also thinking about basically co-ops, how to set up a more democratic economy. And I believe it was written in 1973, or at least it was published in 1973. Yeah, so solid 50 years under its belt, highly recommended. Two more that I kind of pair together, both written in the last 20 to 30 years. A Small Farm Future is pretty recent, and then Dwellers in the Land by Kirkpatrick Sale was written in the 80s. And these books are kind of, when people think of politics, I think often they think of like federal or national politics, but these are both totally applicable to local politics. And one reason why I like this Kirkpatrick Sale bioregional vision is because this idea of bioregionalism is thinking about not arbitrary lines drawn by like relatively uneducated bureaucrats in the sense of state boundaries or nation boundaries, but thinking about what natural boundaries show themselves beyond defensive boundaries for an invading army, like, a mountain chain or a river or something like that. Thinking about watersheds or thinking about natural breaks in the landscape that separate two geographies functionally in the ecosystem sense, or the bioregion sense. And I think bioregionalism has been picked up a little bit more in the Pacific Northwest and then Vermont, but it is, of course, totally applicable to everywhere on Earth. And the places that have been less destroyed by industrialization are closest to this. Like you can look into political boundaries in India to see some of this still preserved and not totally destroyed. But also Kirkpatrick Sale is really good friends with Thomas Pynchon. They went to school together and they've kept in touch. So that's another kind of funny connection. And then just real quick, A Small Farm Future was written in the last 5 years, I think, and as it says on the cover page, making the case for a society built around local economies, self-provisioning, agricultural diversity, and a shared earth. And again, he gives very practical answers to, can we feed the entire earth on a small-scale agricultural economy? As an example of a question that people get really worked up about, but usually they don't have any understanding of. So, and his answer is yes, but you can read the details in this book. Interesting book. Chris Smage is an interesting guy too. All right, and then I will get into my favorites, the ones that are highlighted in green on the list. First, I will be showing Overshoot by William Catton. And this is really the book, I would say, that changed my mind, that got me thinking in a totally different way and a more true way, I would say, a more holistic way that encompasses more complexity than I was formerly able to appreciate. So, Overshoot, as you see on the front cover, he gives some definitions of terms that are very important for the book. And the basic idea of overshoot in ecological terms is an organism outstripping its ability to thrive on a given landscape. And the example that's always given is the Kaibab Plateau is a paradigm example where deer were able to get up on top of this plateau, and it had been a relatively untapped landscape, and the deer ate all the plants they could. The population skyrocketed, grew exponentially as humans are now, and they destroyed their own ability of sustenance, and the deer all died out. And if you replace the Kaibab Plateau with the earth, and if you replace plants with fossil fuels, humans are on the same trajectory, and therefore we are overshooting the earth, the entire earth. And there's this concept of Earth Overshoot Day, where starting in January, how many days do we go before we use all of the available renewable resources on Earth? And I think now it's in August. So then you might ask, well, then how do we use more resources if we use everything on Earth? Well, of course, we're not actually using everything. We're using everything that's renewable in a given year. So what we're doing is we are diminishing our stock. We are diminishing our savings for the future that really our children and grandchildren could use if things got really tough. And unfortunately, we're using these things when things are not tough. We're using these frivolously, and I believe in 1,000 years, when a future archaeologist digs in our landfills, they will be ashamed that they're part of the same species as us. But Overshoot is really the book, the ecological basis of revolutionary change. And he doesn't mean revolution like Russian Revolution, but he means rapid and significant change. Another book is really two books, same author, but this is the work of poetry that I think has been most influential in changing my mind about ecology and helping me think. And interestingly enough, it was written in the 400s AD. And that is Tao Qian or Tao Yuanming, both the same name for the same person. In China, it's common for artists to have multiple names, not necessarily pen names like you'd think of it in the West, but literary names. So you might have a given name and then a literary name based on where you lived or what you're known for or something like that. And so Tao Qian, and if you were going to choose one of these two, this one's bilingual, the Choosing to be Simple, but I prefer these translations by David Hinton. And so let me just read one of the poems that's in here. And got into Tao Qian because he is one of the top 5 most important Chinese poets in the entire civilization. And so, yeah, he's on the list if you want to learn anything about China. All right, so this one is untitled, page 36 if you have the book. I couldn't want another life. This is my true calling, working fields and mulberries with my own 2 hands. I've never failed it, and still, against hunger and cold, there's only hull and chaff. I'm not asking for more than a full stomach. All I want is enough common rice, heavy clothes for winter, and open weaves for the summer heat. Nothing more. But I haven't even managed that. Oh, it can leave you stricken so with grief. And character is fate. If you're simple-minded in life, its ways elude you. That's how it is. Nothing can change it, but then I'll delight in even a single cup of wine. And that's just one example, but just amazing. How Chen was up in the heights of politics, and then it all fell apart for him, and he went back home after a big civil war had destroyed his homeland, and lived back on the family farm and read the greatest books ever written in Chinese culture, and ran his farm with his family. So that is one there. And I am just realizing I left one book. So pardon me, I will be back as soon as possible. All right, and the book I forgot that has to come next is The Sand County Almanac by Aldo Leopold. And if I had to recommend one person to understand ecology, like if you're thinking, ecology, I've heard the name a lot, but I really just want to understand what is it, read Aldo Leopold's Sand County Almanac. So Aldo Leopold was born in the late 1800s, and he went to, I believe it was Yale's forestry school, I think in the first year that it opened. He was involved in conservation, but mainly kind of save the pheasants, make sure there's enough deer for the hunters next year, kind of conservation. And there is an extremely striking passage in a Sand County Almanac where he describes the exact moment that he changed his mind about conservation. And it's called Thinking Like a Mountain, in my edition on page 114. And I will link a PDF of it. I'm not going to read it here because I don't want this video to go on too long. But it is one of the most striking chapters in any book I've ever read, and just blew me away. And that chapter will show you the moment that Aldo Leopold fully understood ecology and our place on the earth as humans. And at the end of Sand County Almanac, he gives this explanation of a land ethic. So the right way of interacting with the earth we live on, our Mother Earth. So, and that's something I wish was much more thought about, and it's a shame that it isn't. But Aldo Leopold, and also just look at this book, beautiful. This is Library of America, just a beautiful, beautiful book here. I can't believe I forgot it. All right, another one that I don't think I've talked about on my channel yet. This one is The Sacred Depths of Nature by Ursula Goodenough, published by Oxford University Press. Oxford also publishes an edition of Aldo Leopold's Sand County Almanac too. But Sacred Depths of Nature, Ursula Goodenough is generally associated in the realm of religious naturalism. So rather than thinking about religion in like a strict binary of, you either believe in a God, kind of a emperor-like God that listens to you and so on and so on, or you're completely a-religious and you don't believe anything, you know, this kind of idea. Religious naturalism is, to put it in a simplistic way, the idea that nature itself, and thinking like a naturalist, a true naturalist, someone like Aldo Leopold, thinking like that allows you to see the sacred depths or the mystery of nature. And you can really have all the same aspects of a religion just strictly with nature. So thinking about rituals, thinking about communion, thinking about in a deep interconnectedness with, you know, beings on the earth. So, but what I like about this book is that she comes at it from a very educated scientific perspective in the beginning, because she is a professor of biology, I believe, at Washington University, I believe. Does it say on here? Yeah, biology at Washington University. And she's a cell biologist, so she really goes small scale, and I really appreciate that. But what she does, and it almost reminds me of Annie Dillard, she goes from this very fine-tuned, you know, strict science, and always is able to connect it to a really deep human point. And that's what I think really is missing in a lot of conversations. So, Sacred Depths of Nature. Another two that are not highlighted in green, but I think are very important before I get to the final two green ones, are The Living Mountain by Nan Shepherd, which is kind of a philosophical travel journey, journal, if you could say that, travel journey too. But so Nan Shepherd wrote this during World War II, and it wasn't published till the 1970s. And Nan Shepherd fell in love with the Cairngorm Mountains in Scotland. And but as I mentioned, it's a philosophical journey more than, you know, conquering the highest peak, for example. And it's really beautiful how she sees nature. And I think for me, what I found most valuable is just kind of just being able to mentally imitate how she views nature when I interact with, you know, a non-human controlled environment. And so it's just awesome, just awesome. And quick short read too, but it packs some wisdom. And then also, really the first book that got me thinking about all of this, but isn't the best necessarily, I would say, but is very good, is The Sunflower Forest by William Jordan III, Ecological Restoration and the New Communion with Nature. And the thing that struck me most from this book is thinking about that idea of what sort of rituals can we develop with wilderness or the natural world that could recultivate a deep connection between people and our life force, basically, which is the earth. And that's really what struck me the most with this. Also thinking about the idea of conservation, you know, when national park, we don't want people on it. But in the end, people have to be in a positive relationship with whatever they interact with in the world. So rather than thinking about humans are so destructive, keep humans away, a more healthy perspective, and I've thought about this a lot, and in the end I do agree, is rather than keeping people away, educate people on how to behave rather than, you know, oh, we're hopeless, just, you know, like end humanity or something like that. And then one way to do that, one way to educate people is possibly through rituals. Like if every high school in the United States had a communal garden, just what that would do as a starting point, as a very trivial example. But yeah, Sunflower Forest by William Jordan III. And last but not least, 2 other books. These aren't necessarily my favorite or the ones I'd recommend most highly, but they just ended up on the bottom of the stack. Second to last is Permaculture, Principles and Pathways Beyond Sustainability by David Holmgren. Now, permaculture, I think, is pretty widely known, but I was always kind of hesitant of it. It seemed a little too culty, too weird to me. And so I sympathize if you think that way about it now, after, you know, if you haven't looked into it or if you have looked into it. But I do feel out of the 2, Bill Mollison or David Holmgren, I am way more sympathetic to the impression that David Holmgren gives off than Bill Mollison. So that's why I went with his book. They basically co-invented it, co-developed it. So you can pick your poison, I suppose. But what I like about this book is, in the end, it's a practical book. He's really trying to show you how to grow your own garden, how to plant your own farm, this kind of thing. But he does it in a systemic way. So principles that you could apply to any aspect of life. You could apply it to medicine. You could apply it to business. You could apply it to education. You could apply it to, yeah, again, gardening or interaction with nature, this kind of thing. And in the end, it's just wisdom. It's just wisdom, you know, that he's collected over his whole life. And he lived it. He lived this. You can see a YouTube video where it shows his, you know, his homestead, his home, I guess you could say. And he has an amazing setup going. So highly recommended, David Holmgren. And last but certainly not least, The Dream of the Earth by Thomas Berry. And I'll just quickly say a few of the things that I really like about Thomas Berry. So, most importantly, the thing that impressed me was that he incorporates not only a Western tradition, but he incorporates ways of thinking that he learned from Native Americans. He incorporates also things he learned by studying Indian civilization and Chinese civilization. And I just love how he thinks about all of these influences interacting in a very positive and almost exuberant way, you could say. He's been good friends. I mean, he's passed away now, but he was good friends with William DeBerry, Theodore DeBerry, who did those big collections of sources of the Japanese tradition, sources of the whatever tradition. And DeBerry was an expert in really all Eastern traditions, but I think mostly in like Chinese and Japanese and Korean and that kind of thing. But also, Thomas Berry is a Catholic priest of the Passionist order. Now, I honestly haven't looked into Passionist order enough to know what distinguishes it from, you know, Dominican or, you know, Benedictine monastery, whatever. But speaking as someone who is not Christian and doesn't believe that kind of thing, this book was very palatable to me. I really love this book. I love this book. It's so hard to pick. If I could just get everyone in the world to read one book of these, which one do I think would cause the most positive effect? I think I would have to pick between this book and Aldo Leopold, I would have to say. Both extremely wise, extremely wise. And they've been a huge positive influence on me. Just seeing the beauty in the world, which is in the end really all we have. So, yeah, excellent stuff. Dream of the Earth. All right, so that's my reading list for an ecological civilization. Like I said, the list that I posted on my Patreon and in my Discord, it also has books I have not read yet, but it really in the end is a public version of my own personal reading list. I took out the stuff that's really idiosyncratic that I don't really think would be too effective. So the public list is as universal as I could make it in my, limited consciousness, or whatever you could say. Yeah, so hopefully you found an interesting book out of these, and I do plan on posting more reading lists on my Patreon. I have a world history in 100 books list that I'm putting together in the end for myself, but I think it could be valuable. And then I'm also creating my own great books list that covers the entire world and all of human history. So it covers all continents and, again, like I said, all of human history. So that one's a pretty long one. We'll see how long that takes me to make, but whenever I do get them in a good state, I'll be sure to share those. So anyway, as always, death is a gang boss.